Hi everybody and welcome back to the Dirt Diaries. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a new episode or new archaeological discovery. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, please don't forget to rate and comment. It really helps me out. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, I'm so glad you're here. Don't forget to like and comment as well. It really helps me there too. And if you are new here, welcome. I hope you love ancient history, mythology, mystery, archaeology, and more as much as I do, because my name is Dr. Teninger Kallenbarger and I bring the ancient world to you. Because no, this isn't ancient aliens. This is the real thing. And of course, these are the Dirt Diaries. And last time on Dirt Diaries, well, technically for those on YouTube, you got a re-released episode back from season 1 where I talked all about a mummy murder mystery. But for everybody else, the last time on Dirt Diaries, we ended our spooky season and spooky month with raising the dead to see if the shades could answer our questions back in the Teomim cave, to see if the ancient Romans there were truly performing necromancy. So what did you guys think of the skulls, the lamps, and swords and spears? Did you think necromancy was going on there? Or what was your opinion? Were ghosts being raised there? Let me know. And I hope you really loved all of our Spooky Month episodes, because now that we are firmly in November, we are once again changing it up today. It's coming up on the holiday season, especially if you're in the States, meaning Mariah Carey and Michael Bublé are already defrosted. And that means not only is Christmas music on repeat, but crazy gift commercials are already doing the rounds on TV. And not only will we see perfume commercials and cologne commercials come out again, but we will also see commercials about jewelry. And it's always along the lines, especially if it's geared towards men buying their wives or girlfriends jewelry that get her a gift she'll love this season. Which honestly, if I'm being completely honest with you guys, I personally prefer jewelry that is inspired by ancient history and the ancient world. So I thought today we should actually look at some ancient pendants that may have been worn on necklaces and more that could also have been protecting the wearer. And as always, I will be getting ready with you all today on a very chilly afternoon, just to keep my hands busy while I chit chat with you all about some really cool ancient jewelry. And yeah, also, this episode weirdly ended up being perfect at this time in November. I know I didn't upload an episode last week for everybody, and I want to just say thank you guys so much for being patient. I'll be honest with you guys. I know I've been honest with you guys before, especially earlier this season and year when I had to take some time off because I had emergency surgery. And it really aligned at that period to talk about prehistoric Venus figurines because I wasn't feeling that great. I wasn't feeling my best. And being able to hang out with you all and talk about ancient art, archaeology, artifacts, and more, it's a way that I'm able to share my knowledge with all of you guys, like friends and family here. But it also weirdly today, like the prehistoric Venus episode, ties into what I'm currently personally going through. So I'll be honest with you guys. A few weeks ago, I was running and I tore something pretty severe in my hip. So I've been dealing with working on getting all the tests and scans possible to figure out if I did in fact tear my labrum and set up physical therapy appointments to figure out, can I heal this on my own before, fingers crossed, I don't need surgery. So just keeping it open with you guys. And what's really interesting is ancient individuals, as you'll see in the episode, well, they would wear pendants and amulets to help them either be protected against the evil eye, be protected from malintent, or anything else like evil spirits. Of course, something that I didn't bring in today, or I should have now that I'm thinking about it, are also known as Abrax gems. And we actually have some writings from Roman antiquity where authors are noting that these little stone amulets could help protect you from scorpion stings, could protect you from the effects of being drunk, and more. So a little jewelry episode, a little healing episode. I hope you guys are all doing well, because while today all of the slogans for jewelry is every kiss begins with K, to the ancients, well, it was more like every kiss begins in clay and over time was expressed through jewels of the empire. Girls don't want mainstream jewelry. We want the ones that adorned queens and goddesses. So let's go ahead and dive on in and drop your favorites below. So first for today, I actually wanted to start with a pendant that is a bit of a left field for Dirt Diaries. Why? Because normally I usually focus on items and aspects that have to do with the societies and cultures in the Eastern Mediterranean and of course in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and more. But this first one that we're talking about today, this first pendant, actually comes from the Scandinavian region. And yes, this one has ties to Norse mythology. So get out your mythology books and hark back to your knowledge from Marvel's cinematic universe, because there is some overlap of what Marvel actually got correct. Back in 2022, archaeologists were excavating and they came across a pretty incredible find, that of a small representation of Thor's hammer known as Mjölnir. And a quick little tangent about the name, but I absolutely love anytime the Instagram reels come across my feed where the cast of Marvel is sitting down and the question is, what's the name of Thor's hammer? I just love when Paul Rudd just looks at the camera and says, Jonathan? I don't know why, it gets me every single time. But no, Thor's hammer is actually termed Mjölnir, and it features predominantly in Norse mythology. It's actually very important. And this little pendant was actually uncovered in southwestern Sweden. Now, this little hammer pendant, well, it was found when archaeologists were excavating the area of where a future housing development was going to go. And no, this was not the first time that excavations were occurring in and around this area, because in the past, archaeologists working here, well, they had found artifacts dating all the way back to the Neolithic period, as well as the Iron Age and the Viking Age. And for those wondering what exactly is the time period for the quote-unquote Viking Age in history, it's really around the later part of the 8th century CE, and it goes until the mid-late period, or portion, I should say, of the 11th century. And the Viking Age actually ends specifically, if you're looking for a date, specifically the Viking Age for historians ends specifically at 1066 CE at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. That is the cutoff. So it's late 8th century, so think 790s and up. 790s to 1066, I would say, is the typical Viking Age. But while excavations have been going on here prior to this one back in 2022, well, this is actually the first time that Thor's hammer in any way, shape, or form, including jewelry and pendant, had been discovered here. Prior to this, we don't have anything. So this amulet, well, it dates to the 10th century CE, so think 900s, and is only 3 centimeters long. It's a little guy. He's adorable. I love him. And if you're wondering, well, what's 3 centimeters in inches? 3 centimeters is roughly under 2 inches, just shy of 2 inches. Now, this amulet was actually cast in lead, and I have some final thoughts about that. That comes at the end. And in this form, it's pretty stylized, so likely there would have been others floating around during the 10th century CE. So this stylized amulet, of course, beautifully depicts Mjölnir. And on the side of the hammer is actually a beautiful interlacing pattern. And if we look at the side, there's actually a small hole on the shaft of the hammer, which has led archaeologists and scholars to actually suggest that this may have been worn as a pendant, as an amulet around somebody's neck over 1,000 years ago, which is pretty cool. And with this hole, it could have been laced through a piece of rope, a piece of leather that was cut very fine to tie around your neck. And if it wasn't, worn as a pendant or an amulet on somebody's physical person, I am very inclined to believe that this piece of jewelry would have been strung and hung in some shape or form. Maybe somebody hung it in their doorway or near their doorway as a symbol of protection. I'm a bit more inclined to believe that somebody was wearing it around their neck. And we even saw something similar to this. Of course, it's separated by thousands of years in the prehistoric Venus episode, the prehistoric goddess episode, where one of the prehistoric Venus figures, I believe it was the Venus of Holofels, actually where her head should have been, there was actually a loop there that scholars and archaeologists have proposed may have allowed for some sort of fabric or material to be strung through it and could have been worn as jewelry. And another quick Dr. 10 tangent. Many times when we see objects or artifacts that are pierced through in any manner, way, shape, or form, especially when they are small and portable, well, they really lend themselves to be worn in one form or another. So worn around the neck, worn around your wrist. For we even see that occurring in the Bronze Age, especially with seal stones and seals in general. If they're pierced, there has been some scholarship done to suggest that they could have been worn. And specifically on the Pylos combat agate, that little agate is actually pierced all the way through. So think like a bead. And what's really interesting is the artisans who crafted it. Actually, if you look really, really closely at the finer details of the Pylos combat agate, the victorious warrior, when he's smiting, let me use my other arm, when he's smiting down on his wrist, we actually see that he himself is wearing a seal stone on his wrist. So we do know that little objects like these could have and were actually worn. Okay, but back to Mjölnir. So in Norse mythology, this hammer was specifically crafted for and used by none other than Thor. And he would wield Mjölnir to protect Asgard. And during the Viking Age, Mjölnir was considered to have protective aspects and even protective powers due to it being the weapon of one of the strongest gods in their pantheon. And Mjölnir and representations of Mjölnir actually acted as apotropaic images, meaning it averted evil and even the evil eye. And of course, that also includes malintent. And what's interesting about this time period in history, so the 10th century CE, when this amulet was crafted, so the 900s, during this time in history in what we know today as Sweden, well, the area was actually beginning to convert to Christianity, meaning this pendant may have afforded the wearer an idea that they were being protected by their beloved gods, but also may have acted as a symbol of the traditional and local gods of the area, as compared to the newer religion of Christianity that was coming in. Now, currently, when this artifact was reported on, it was noted that it was undergoing restoration and preservation. And during this time, scientists are planning to actually analyze the metallic composition of the amulet itself, which is so cool because it's made of lead, meaning, as a metals girl, we could potentially be doing lead isotope analysis to see if we could get a specific mine or at least narrow down a specific region where this lead came from so that we could look more into workshops and production of amulets like this. So fingers crossed about that, because there has actually been no updates about this artifact since then. And also scholars, archaeologists, and conservators have noted that other amulets like this in the past would have been gilded or silvered. So hopefully by undergoing different testing, we can get more in-depth analysis of what this amulet may have looked like back in its prime over 1,000 years ago. And this was such a cool find when it was first announced. I mean, it still is a really incredible find to talk about. And when I cover cultures and beliefs and artwork outside of Rome with my students when we look outside of the Roman Empire to showcase and highlight how other societies and cultures were creating sacred pieces of art to connect to their gods. My students are always blown away at this artifact since I've added it to the course. And also when we talk a little bit about Norse mythology, my students are always flabbergasted at how inaccurate Marvel is in their representations of the Norse gods, such as Thor, Loki, and Odin. And even Hel in Thor Ragnarok, they're very, very fascinated at how wrong the Marvel Cinematic Universe got it, even though, of course, Marvel was pulling from it and was not ever intended to be historical in that sense. But now we're taking a hop, skip, and a jump from southwest Sweden all the way over to Egypt, and we are going back a few thousand years. Specifically, almost 2,500 years prior to this pendant of Mjölnir, because we're going to be talking about this necklace and pendant specifically, because today this is known as the heart necklace of Hatnefer. And Hatnefer was a woman who lived during Dynasty 18 of Egypt's New Kingdom. What's really shocking is we know a lot about her. For a high-ranking woman back in Egypt, it's so cool to learn about. And her tomb was actually uncovered when the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York led excavations in Thebes in the 20th century. And her tomb was actually discovered in 1936. So again, quick little tangent, this is after Howard Carter already discovered King Tut's tomb. Her mummy and the burial goods that were discovered alongside of her really highlight her high-ranking status as a New Kingdom Egyptian woman. We know that she was about 60 years old when she passed. She stood at just over 5 feet tall, and when she died, she actually had her hair braided before she was laid to rest around 1473 BCE. Her rock-cut chamber tomb was actually constructed for her from her son, whose name was Senenmut. And if that name, Senenmut, actually stands out to you, there's a reason why. It's because he was the architect, high-ranking official, and close friend of Hatshepsut, which, yes, before you guys ask, yes, there are debates currently on how close of a friend he truly was to Hatshepsut. There have, of course, been rumors and speculation that their relationship went way more than friends and that she potentially took him as a lover during her reign. So let me know if you want me to deep dive into that. So her son was a close confidant, friend, and architect of Hatshepsut, meaning Hatnefer lived through an incredible time period in Egypt. She would have seen beautiful transitions of power with household names from Egyptian history that we still know about today. So as she grew up and grew old, she would have seen the reigns of Ahmose I, Amenhotep I, Thutmose I, who actually is likely not related to Amenhotep I. Little fun fact. It's actually believed that he was a high-ranking military official who took the role of pharaoh after Amenhotep I. And then after Thutmose I, we get Thutmose II, who is the half-brother of Hatshepsut. After his early and untimely death, the throne would then be thrust onto young Thutmose III's hands, and she would be acting as his co-regent until he came of age. But she would take the throne for herself from her stepson. Because yes, Thutmose III is actually not Hatshepsut's son. He was the child of Thutmose II and another woman from the royal harem. Hatshepsut actually only had daughters between herself and Thutmose II. So Hatnefer, she was actually married during her lifetime to a man named Rapmos. And of course, together they would have Senenmut. We know that during her lifetime, she eventually became the head of her household and was even given the high title of Nebet Per, which means house mistress. Now, within her tomb was this beautiful necklace. Like, it's absolutely gorgeous. And this is a heart scarab necklace, or what is known today as a heart scarab necklace, that features a pendant of a scarab beetle on a gold chain. Now, I had to grab my own little alabaster scarab from Egypt so I can talk about her pendant. So the scarab was actually the pendant, so it would have sat at the bottom of her necklace. And on the top side of the scarab, so think of the back of the scarab shell, well, it's actually engraved with a portion of spell known as 30A from the Book of the Dead. And really, spell 30A is about the individual addressing their own heart, to specifically ask your own heart to not go against you, to not lie about you and your life during the final judgment. And of course, this is super interesting because Book of the Dead, who doesn't love the Book of the Dead? And according to the Mummy, you mustn't read from the Book of the Dead. But what is cooler than that, in my opinion, is the fact that her name is not the only one that shows up on this scarab. In fact, her name is superimposed on top of another's who had been etched away and etched off of the scarab, which indicates that this piece was originally not for her. And heart scarabs in Egypt were really popular as amulets. Why? Because to the ancient Egyptians, the heart wasn't only the center of life for individuals, but also was the center of their thinking, their memory, and more. And of course, in what would no doubt be the most important test of your life, was when your heart specifically would be measured up against the feather of Ma'at, which is really the personification and goddess of truth, justice, and really control over that, control over the chaos. And of course, as the Book of the Dead denotes, if your heart weighs less than the feather of truth, the feather of Ma'at, well, then you win the best prize of all, which is you get to go forward and live out your afterlife in what was known as the Field of Reeds. If your heart weighed heavier than the feather, well, you did not pass go. You did not collect $200. You went right to jail in every sense of that, because the crocodile-headed goddess Ammit would be right underneath the scales waiting for a snack, that of your heart. And if Ammit got your heart, that ended your journey into the afterlife. You were simply no more. And a quick little sidebar is that in all of the representations of that imagery and of that scene itself from the Book of the Dead, when we are witnessing the weighing of the heart ceremony in front of Anubis, Thoth, and Osiris, well, in all of the representations that we do have, we never actually see a representation of the heart weighing more than the feather of truth, which is super interesting. So hopefully, fingers crossed, all of the ancient Egyptians were able to end up in their afterlife. All right, back to the scarab, because scarabs were super popular for amulets back in the ancient day and time, especially in New Kingdom Egypt. And no, scarabs do not munch on you like how they're portrayed in the 1999 cinematic masterpiece, The Mummy. No, that's not what scarabs do. Scarabs as actual beetles, they push dung. And scarabs in their mythology actually really represent the movement of the sun across the sky. And so the underside of the amulet, so the flat side of the amulet, actually had spell 30B inscribed on the bottom. And spell 30B is also referred to as the scarab spell. And during the mummification process of ancient Egyptian individuals, scarab amulets would actually be placed on the chest. And for Hatnefer, I really hope that her heart weighed less than the feather of truth. I truly hope that she was able to get to the Field of Reeds and enjoy her afterlife. And considering memory was such a huge aspect to the ancient Egyptians, and having people remember your name and speak your name, I wonder what Hatnefer would think today if she knew that we were still uttering her name, that we still knew about her today. Alrighty, and moving from New Kingdom Egypt, we're heading to Rome. A little bit of Roman Republic into and throughout Imperial Rome. And before we talk about some Roman amulets, a quick little rundown of Roman history and chronology periods, just so we can all be on the same page. To start off, we begin around the 8th century with the Roman kingdom. The 6th century is when we begin the Roman Republic. And then, of course, the Republic really ends once Augustus takes control. After Cleopatra and Mark Antony are dealt with, really kind of ends the Republic and begins Imperial Rome, or the Roman Empire. And then later on in history, Rome would split into two, and fall of Western Rome is late 5th century CE. And then, of course, Eastern Rome would become the Byzantine Empire. So for today's look, because I do have a Roman pendant that we're going to talk about later on, I think I'm going to try and do a red and gold kind of look just to match the necklace today. Okay, moving on. Because of course we know that Rome had beautiful jewelry, including beautiful earrings, pearl earrings, necklaces, bracelets, rings, and more. But from Rome, we also have evidence of pendants and amulets that would have been worn for protection. And these amulets would offer protection to those who wore them. So who was specifically wearing these that we do know of, including the one that I have on right now? Well, a lot of times it was women and children. So why women and children? Well, women for protection, including that of in childbirth, and for children specifically. Well, according to ancient authors, they were seen as the most vulnerable due to their ages, especially when we get into the realm of people possibly using magic against other Romans back in the day, that it was believed that they would go after children first. And because of this, the threat of magic, curses, and more, including the evil eye, well, children had to be protected. So for their own safety and protection, they would wear different amulets. Even Plutarch, writing in the 1st century, notes that the gaze from a human, in terms of the evil eye, could actually kill and or harm small animals and children. So the amulet for young boys that they were known to wear is actually called a bulla. And a bulla is actually a round pendant that would have been worn around their neck. And for girls and even young women, well, they would wear what is called a lunula. Now, at first, it seems that these bullas were only worn by patrician children, but over time, any young boy who was born free could and would wear it. So if you were of the upper class as a young boy, your bulla may be gold or of another metal type like silver. And if you were not of the upper class, or if you simply could not afford a bulla of such fine quality and or material, it's been suggested that those bullas could have been made out of leather. And I'm sure some of you are wondering, how old would these children have been when they first received a bulla? Well, it's really not known specifically, but there has been a postulation that young boys may have received a bulla, or their first bulla even, on the 9th day after their birth. Now, why the 9th day after their birth? Well, it's because on the 9th day after the birth of a boy, these boys would actually be given their names. There would be a whole naming ceremony. Of course, during this time, people would come over, they would congratulate the father on the birth of his son, and there would be a whole naming ceremony to really showcase to the community that a son was not only born, but a child was being accepted into the family. Because yes, in the Roman world, not every child who was born was accepted and or kept in the family. But as the child grows, so would their traditions and their beliefs, including, once you reached a certain age, you would not need so much protection on you anymore because you're turning into a young adult, you're turning into a man. So there is some speculation that Roman boys would have actually shed their bulla alongside of their toga praetexta. And when they shed that toga, they would actually be donning a new type of toga, that of the toga virilis. And as they were taking off their bulla from their neck that had, really protected them for quite some time now that they're into their teens. Well, it's believed that the bulla would have been left on the household altar in the ancient Roman household, and these are called larariums. And it's believed that these bulla would have been dedicated to the household gods of the Lares. And of course, while we do have textual and iconographical evidence of bulla being used for young Roman boys, we don't really see much occurring in terms for bulla being worn by young girls. So it's really unclear from evidence if all girls would wear the bulla, if no girls would wear the bulla. But what we do know is young girls and women would also wear the lunula, because back in April of 2023, a gold necklace with a beautiful pendant was unveiled for the first time in over 50 years. That came actually from a grave of a young girl that dates to about 1800 years ago. Now, this gold necklace and pendant was believed to have been worn by the young girl who was buried in this coffin. And the lunula itself is a pendant that has a crescent-shaped moon, and it's believed to have ties to the Roman moon goddess Luna. So here, this jewelry was created and crafted with protection in mind for a young girl almost 2,000 years ago. Other pieces of jewelry that were uncovered in her tomb include earrings, a hairpin, a pendant, and beads, and all of these were actually found to bear symbols of the Roman moon goddess Luna. So the grave and the jewelry were actually discovered back in 1971, and its presence in the 1800-year-old burial actually really highlights the religious diversity in and around Jerusalem in the 2nd century CE. And while we don't know much about this young girl, we can see really humanizing aspects about this internment that will pull at anybody's heartstrings. Like how her family carefully crafted and curated what was going to be placed with her and around her in her coffin to keep her safe in the world that comes after this one. Now, while I myself am not a mother, you can still feel very connected here with the act of wanting to ensure somebody's protection that you love, no matter the time or the place. And back in the 70s, this young girl's coffin was discovered on Mount Scopus in the northeastern portion of the city of Jerusalem. And this finding is actually pretty crazy because her burial and the entire burial site itself was found by complete and utter accident, because when a bulldozer was going through the area, it actually carved up the burial site unknowingly. Nobody did this on purpose, I have to say. It was found by complete and utter accident when a bulldozer just blew right through it. And again, this find is really, really cool in my own personal opinion, because today cultures throughout the Mediterranean and throughout the world still have the belief and superstitions around the evil eye. And if you were wondering, some of the earliest evidence that we do have of the evil eye in terms of representations comes from the mid 6th century BCE in Greece, I believe. But of course, people have been using amulets for protection for thousands of years. And even this year, we got a really cool archaeological news report all about a life-sized statue that was carved in relief just outside of Pompeii, where the statue of the woman actually depicted her wearing a lunula necklace. So these statues were actually discovered last year in 2024, but they were not publicized and or reported on until earlier this year. And these were recovered in the necropolis of Porto Santo. Archaeologists and scholars have stylistically dated these reliefs to be anywhere in the later Republic period. So they've dated it anywhere between 131 and 31 BCE. So really that is the tail end of the Republic period. And these statues were actually part of a monumental tomb located in the necropolis. And we know, for example, that this woman is of elite status, not only due to her jewelry, including, of course, the beautiful Lunala depiction, but it's also her robes and other attributes that she has in her other hand that do note that she was probably somebody of status outside of just being elite. So let me line my eyes and I'll be right back. It has been suspected by archaeologists and scholars that this woman may have actually been a priestess to Ceres. So Ceres is a Roman agricultural and fertility goddess, and her Greek equivalent, or her Greek pantheon counterpart, is Demeter. And archaeologists and scholars are pointing to a possibility of her being a priestess of Ceres because of the laurel leaves that she is holding in her hand, because these would have been used in purification rituals. And with her being an older woman, not, a young girl, not a child, well, it makes sense that she would be wearing a lunala as a priestess of Ceres, because Ceres did have some lunar connections, and the symbology that is tied to, of course, lunar phases would make sense for a priestess of hers to have on her. And of course, the lunar connection comes from the fact that the lunar phases for a goddess of agriculture and fertility would actually help denote the harvest cycle, the seasons, the change and growth, and all of that kind of stuff. And last but certainly not least, I have two final pendants that are very iconographically and stylistically similar to one another, and I want to end on them because I've already talked a lot about pendants and amulets that have ties to non-Abrahamic traditions, beliefs, and religions. But I want to end with two that date to the 5th and 6th centuries CE that do have ties to Abrahamic belief systems such as Judaism and early Christianity, to highlight that these protective pendants and amulets were not only specific to polytheistic belief systems, but that they belonged to just to the ancient peoples in general across the board and throughout antiquity. Protective pendants and amulets were not specific to one group of people. Rather, everybody in the ancient world was worried and concerned about protecting themselves and their loved ones, just like we do today. So back last year, archaeologists working in modern day Turkey in the ancient city of Hadrianopolis, well, they uncovered a 1600-year-old bronze pendant, which is super cool on its own. I love ancient jewelry. I love having modern reproductions of ancient jewelry. I think it's just so cool to be able to wear styles that somebody wore thousands of years ago. But anywho, so this 1600-year-old pendant was uncovered in excavations. And, well, the imagery that is depicted on this amulet is very interesting, for it depicts King Solomon on horseback, and he is spearing a demon or a devil, which this is so cool. In fact, this is the only amulet of its kind and style to be found ever in modern day Turkey. Like, this is so fascinating. And along with the really cool imagery that we do get, we also get some inscriptions. And of course, we love that. So the side that actually shows Solomon bears an inscription in Greek reading, quote, "Our Lord defeated evil." And the other side of the pendant actually names 4 archangels, that of Azrael, Gabriel, Michael, and Israfel, which I actually didn't know there was an archangel with that name. This pendant to archaeologists was likely used as a protective amulet to protect against evil, danger, the evil eye, and more. And this find really highlights that the city was an important religious center. And the layer that the pendant was uncovered in dates to the 5th century CE, when the city was part of the larger Byzantine Empire. And the rulers around this time period, so 5th century CE, the rulers actually belonged to the Theodosian dynasty and the Leonid dynasty. And this find is super fascinating in my opinion because it's the first of its kind to be uncovered in modern day Turkey. But it's really similar to another pendant that comes just a little bit later than this one stylistically, that was actually found over 40 years ago in the Galilee region. So let's talk about that one to end us off today. So this 1500-year-old amulet was uncovered and discovered over 40 years ago back in the village of Arbel, which is in the Galilee region. And it was found by a resident there, and it was handed over to the Antiquities Authority later on by a family member. And this amulet dates to the late 5th and early 6th century CE, and is believed to have been produced either in the Galilee region or even in Lebanon. Amulets like this and throughout the Levant are also sometimes referred to as Solomon's seal. And the imagery that we see on this pendant and amulet is almost identical to the one that we just talked about. We see a rider overcoming and smiting down an evil spirit. But here on this amulet, the spirit is actually a woman, or at least a female demon or a female spirit. And to some scholars, she has been identified as the mythical figure known as Gelo or Gilu. And pardon my pronunciation on that. But if you're on YouTube, I also have the spelling of it. And this mythical figure would have been a threat to women and children. And she was also associated with the evil eye. Like the other amulet found in Turkey, we also get beautiful inscriptions here, including one in Greek that reads, quote, "The one God who conquers evil." And then underneath the horse, we see the letters IAW, which corresponds with the Jewish divine name, often spelled and abbreviated as YHWH, pronounced Yahweh. And on the reverse side of the amulet, we actually see a really cool depiction of an eye actually being attacked by a plethora of things. We see 2 lions, we see snakes, we see scorpions, and a bird all attacking this evil eye. And the other Greek inscription on the reverse side actually reads, quote, "One God." End quote. And Arbel, during the time period that it was crafted in, so the late 5th and 6th century CE, during the Byzantine period, well, this was actually a Jewish settlement, suggesting to archaeologists and scholars today that this amulet and pendant may have been worn and used by somebody of the Jewish faith. And they also believe that whoever was wearing this likely did so to protect themselves if they were a woman, or to protect themselves if they were young children. I'm putting on my Sailor Moon beanie because I'm freezing today, and hopefully this will warm me up. Of course, it's the complete opposite of the lunala for symbol and iconography wise, but pretty cool nonetheless. And from all of these, amulets today, is there any that you guys would actually wear today? Of course, I'm wearing a modern interpretation of a lunala because I love being able to wear interpretations of ancient jewelry today, or, reconstructions of ancient jewelry. I love that. I love that we're able to recraft jewelry today that somebody wore thousands of years ago. I just think that's so cool to be able to do something like that, and to think that, women and young girls back in the Roman Republic and even the Roman Empire, that they would also have worn lunalas around their neck for protection is just so cool to think about. And to be completely honest, I think I would wear actually all of these types of pendants, necklaces, amulets, and more, not only for, perhaps their protective qualities and apotropaic meanings behind them, but just because we have them today just because they survived in the archaeological record from the Scandinavian region to Egypt. It's so cool that we have all of them here today. So with that being said, let me know, which amulet would you guys wear? Did you know about any of these amulets? And I'm trying to think of anything else. Yeah, this episode actually worked perfectly because if you want any of these amulets, if you find, any of them online, they make really cool, holiday presents. And with family holiday season coming up, especially in the States, well, the evil eye might be shooting off because of jealousy and envy. So, you know what? Protect yourself like an ancient individual and get yourself a really cool ancient amulet just to have on hand, just in case, somebody's acting out of pocket this holiday season. But from me to you, thank you so much for being patient with this episode. It's been a crazy ride, just health-wise and everything right now. So I really appreciate your patience with this. And once again, I would not be able to do this without you guys. So thank you guys so much. If you guys want to come to Turkey, there is still a few more spots open. Trip is confirmed. We're going to Turkey next year. If you want to come with us and see some of these cool amulets, other incredible artifacts in museums like the world's oldest peace treaty from the Battle of Kadesh, you can go ahead and come with me and all of your other ancient history loving friends. And as always, keep your books open, stay curious, and I will see you guys in the next episode.